Syllogism. What is a syllogism? Syllogism derives from the Greek syllogismos, which means conclusion or inference. And a syllogism is a simple logical operation that derives a conclusion from two or more propositions which are assumed to be true, whether they are in fact or for the sake of logical argument. So, in other words, the assumption of truth can be conditional. Like if you're just saying, okay, if this thing is true and this thing is true, then the third would be true. You can do that in a discussion without accepting that the propositions actually are true in real life or not. The basic form of a syllogism consists of a general statement. That's the major premise. General refers to the idea of genera, a large category of things. Then a specific statement, a minor premise. Again, specific referring to the idea of species, a subset of the genera or the genus. And then a conclusion coming from that. So, for example, you can form a syllogism in this way. Number one, all dogs are carnivores. That's the major premise. It's general, speaking of the genus of dogs. All dogs are X. Next, you have German shepherds are dogs. That's the minor premise. That's specific. These things are part of the larger whole. The species is part of the genus. All dogs are carnivores. German shepherds are dogs. And then your conclusion follows from that. Therefore, German shepherds are carnivores. Syllogisms are awesome, and they're incredibly handy. The utility of syllogisms is fairly obvious. There's two great benefits. Number one, if the form of the syllogism is correct, then the conclusion will necessarily follow, or it will be self-evident, obvious. And second, if the form is correct and the premises are true, then the conclusion will be certain and inarguable. Now, that's not always the case, though, and this is where syllogisms can go wrong. In the first place, if the form is not correct, then the conclusion will not necessarily follow. So it's very important to make sure the syllogism is being formed properly. And secondarily, if either of the premises are not true, then the conclusion will not necessarily be true. So you can have a syllogism, a logical argument that is a correct argument. It follows a correct form. But if the things you're proposing, if your premises are not true, then even though it's a correct argument, it's not a true argument. So both things have to be in place. The form has to be correct and the premises have to be true. So here are examples of both kinds of problems. Let's take a look at an example of incorrect form. First premise, all fish live in water. Second premise, dolphins live in water. Conclusion, therefore, dolphins are fish. Do you see the problem? The first one is a categorical statement. All fish live in water. The second one, though, doesn't have to do with the category. It's saying dolphins live in water. The category is not things that live in water. The first category that we're talking about, the general statement, is all fish, not all things that live in water. And so because the second, the minor premise, deals with dolphins living in water, that doesn't necessarily connect it to the genus of fish. So therefore, the conclusion doesn't follow. It's an incorrect form. Here's an example of a similar argument with correct form, but a false premise. Everything that lives in water is a fish. Dolphins live in water. Therefore, dolphins are fish. Now, this argument is 100% correct. It's saying that everything that lives in water is a fish. That's the general statement. And then it's picking a specific. Dolphins live in water. Therefore, dolphins are fish. So that's a correct argument. The problem is, obviously, the first premise is wrong. Not everything that lives in water is a fish. This is a correct argument, but it's a false argument because the premise is false.